Hi, so this season is called Lent, and it comes from a Latin word that means to lengthen, as in the days get longer, as in the sun is out more. Woohoo! And it is a representative of 40 days before Easter, and sometimes Lent is associated with reflection and challenge and going through a wilderness time to get to this amazing moment of Easter, which is the pinnacle of the Christian faith, to say that if Jesus really was who he said he was, if he actually has dominion over death, if he can't be destroyed because he is God incarnate, then that should probably mean something to us and make some changes in our life and our understanding. So the Church Universal has put together what's called a lectionary, and they give suggestions on pieces of scripture to read and teach from during Lent, all the seasons of the church, all year long, every year, and it's on a rotating schedule. And this year is called Year B, or Yearb. And one of the selections for this week, March 7th, is Psalm 19. And the Psalms are super cool because they are arguably some of the most raw pieces of scripture and depictions of the human experience that you have in scripture. A lot of times we think of like the church and the Bible as really flowery and well put together and polished and sometimes hypocritical. But the Psalms run the huge emotional gamut from beautiful poetry, tender depiction, earnest prayers, even to angry laments like, God, where are you? What are you doing? Why is this happening to me? And Psalm 19 has some really cool depictions of God, and so I want to go through it with us together. So verse 1 says that the heavens are telling the glory of God. And the glory of God is interesting because the Hebrew word for glory means weightiness or heaviness. And there's an idea in Revelation that these kings from the earth, these bigwigs, when they're in heaven surrounding God's throne, they can't help but take off their crowns and then bend down to worship God. And then as soon as they get back up, they can't help but bend down, like there's a weightiness, a heaviness about them that makes them want to honor God. Moses, in front of the burning bush in Exodus, takes off his sandals because he's on holy ground, and there's this notion that he too is in the glory of God and he wants to bend down and worship time and again. Are there ways that we can understand in our day-to-day lives a glory of God, that we want to actually honor God, and it's not done just out of obligation? It's not, well, I better pray before I put this bread in my mouth. That you actually want to honor God in some way, to bend down, to be brought low by God's glory. So that you literally can't stand it, right? You have to get down and say, God, you are greater. And I want to submit myself to learn from you, to follow you, to be more like your son. God's glory says that it's in the heavens. Now, the Hebrews had this idea that the heavens weren't just above us. We talk about like looking up to look at heaven, but they had this idea that earth is here and then the heavens surround it. It's all around it. So God's glory is surrounding us, almost like a big planet hug. And our goal is to wonder, can we honor God in our words and our actions? The second part of verse 1 says, the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Now, the firmament's another name for like dome. So think of earth, think of the heavens surrounding it, and then it says inside the dome, God's handiwork is known. Look at all the creation around you, all of the plants and the animals and the cycles and the natural law that God has set up as evidence of his artistry. In Romans 1:20, it says that God's eternal glory, his divine power are clearly known so that people are without excuse, which is a way of saying when you look around at the sunrise and sunset and the rivers and the mountains and the grass and the mosquitoes, you can't help but know that God has made something beautiful for us. So his glory surrounds us like a big hug, weighing down on us, but not in an oppressive way, but in a God, I want to honor you way. And as you look around in creation, we recognize that God's artistry is at work. So do we slow down and give a moment of thanks? Can you give thanks for something that God has created today? Maybe that's you. Maybe that's people in your lives. Maybe that's the beauty that you witness around you. We spend too much time complaining. It would benefit us to spend some more time giving thanks and being appreciative. Positivity. Verse 2 says, day by day, daily he speaks, and at night he declares knowledge. So imagine going throughout your day and having those moments of teaching. Now, it's probably not going to be God actually speaking into you, and you're like, I'm on a conference call. It's probably more like those moments that make you tear up with happiness, a video that you see that you want to share, a moment, an interchange, and an interaction that touches your heart. Maybe it's someone saying something to you, and it just feels like it's at a different level than all the other dribble that we wade through day to day. Day by day, he speaks, but at night declares wisdom. Now, people far smarter than I will say that we learn and integrate while we sleep, right? And the joke of like sleeping on your textbook so that it soaks into your brain or whatever. But maybe this is what the psalmist is talking about, that throughout the day we have these moments where God or others or nature or yourself are speaking to you, but then it's up to us, here's the key, to integrate that into knowledge, not just a moment during the day, but to integrate it into knowledge that you know, that you work into your life, into your vocabulary, into your heart, that you take with you so that you grow. We don't want to float through life. We don't want to drift through life and everything's just the same and we never work on ourselves or get better. But if we seek to notice the ways that God and others speak and teach us throughout the day, then taking a concerted effort, here's the key, you have to think about it. God, don't let me forget this. Maybe I should write this down in my journal today. Maybe I should tell a couple people about this interaction so that I have a chance of integrating this into knowledge that I might grow as a person through the night, through my days. I could be a better person. I could be more compassionate. I could be more aware. I could be more generous, more patient. Day by day he speaks, and at night proclaims knowledge. This is a really cool depiction of God here. It almost gets a little Greek mythy here. In verse 4, in Psalm 19, it says that in the heavens he has set a tent for the sun. So imagine the sun, this huge blazing ball of heat and life and light, and he puts a tent over it. And you can just imagine if there's a tent over the sun, of course, you've got rays that are bursting through the seams, and you know something incredible is in there. You just want to get a little peek and radiate in its heat. He puts a tent for the sun. Then he comes out like a groom and like a strong man runs his course with joy. So imagine God as the sun, and then he comes out like a groom who's happy, who's excited, who's got the shoulders square and the chest puffed, and he's just beaming and he's so excited. And then he runs his course, and maybe the course is through your life, through the earth, through God's creation with joy. Do you have these moments in life where you have that second where it feels like, oh, that was such a great moment? I'm so happy and thankful that this just happened. Oh, I just had such a great conversation. Oh, I just watched this video and it made me so tingly and fuzzy. What if you started to think of those moments as God and his blazing sun manifestation sprinting past you just for a moment with joy? Like a laughing child, a human torch going, and you feel for a moment that warmth, that heat, and you give God thanks. And at night, you reflect upon those moments where God has come out of the tent like a sun, like a strong man groom, blazing with joy. Say, God, help me remember this, integrate this into knowledge that I might grow and be more thankful and be more patient, be more aware of your creation. It sounds like something we could benefit from. In verse 7, it says that God decrees to make wise the simple. Now, I don't know if you ever feel simple. I do. And maybe that means dumb, or maybe that means uncomplicated or uninteresting, or maybe that means monotonous or apathetic. God brings wisdom to the simple. How many times have you learned something? Whether it's through a textbook or a life lesson, and you're like, gosh, that's so, of course, yeah, of course. And you connect the dots and it feels so simple, but now you know it. And so there's some wisdom that you've gained. This is the business that God is in. Though God is complex and complicated and we can't know the mind and heart of God fully, it's also not rocket science. What? Rocket science. For us to learn some lessons from God, the Creator. God doesn't want to confuse you. God doesn't want to set up such an impossible paradigm and matrix for you that you'll never be able to figure it out. Sometimes life's lessons are the most simple, and once we know them, becomes this moment of God running past in joy, blazing like the sun. And we give God thanks and ask to integrate it into our lives that we might grow in knowledge in the night. My Bible slammed shut in the middle of this, so I'm doing a cool thing here. In verse 8, it says that the commandments of God are clear, enlightening the eyes. Now, in the middle of the Enlightenment, this period of history where people are inviting rationale and reason into their lives, usually juxtaposed to religion. The Enlightenment was this moment where people said, we can figure out stuff for ourselves. We can learn and we can be smarty pants, and we don't need to rely on all this religious hocus pocus. Later in the 1940s, the theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer will say, yeah, we don't want to make a God of gaps, where every time we don't understand something in science, we don't know how to explain it, we just say, oh, God did it. Bonhoeffer would say that you can take rationale and reason and be enlightened. You can use your mind, but just know that God is at the core of it. And when we find formulas and we find language in science and philosophy and psychology, this is just language used to describe what God has already done. Here it says God's commands enlighten our eyes. Now we have huge, especially as 21st century Americans, we have huge resistance to commands and laws in general, I think. We want to fight the man. We don't want to be told what to do. We have this rebellious streak in us. We are tempted by the things we shouldn't have. Speed limit signs are like begging for us to put the pedal to the metal, right? But I think what the psalmist might be getting at is that at its best, when we're in our best mindset, God's commands, which are meant to keep us safe, meant to keep us in line, meant to keep us living our best selves in life, they enlighten our eyes. Maybe in more of a metaphorical and also physical sense, imagine you have God running past you as the blazing human torch from the sun out of the tent. Your eyes are literally enlightened as you see some of the goodness, some of the teaching, some of the wisdom of God. This is a big shift that I struggle to make all the time, that we struggle to make, to look at commands of God, laws of God, and truly embrace them as, okay, he's trying to keep me safe. He's trying to help me live my best life. He's trying to help me grow. It's not meant to squash us, to smush out our creativity. It's not meant to keep us down or miserable or silent. The commands of God are meant to enlighten our eyes, that we might see more fully the potential our lives have in the world around us. It says in verse 9, that the ordinance of God are desired. And again, we raise our eyebrows. What? No, they're not. We don't desire ordinances. But the writer of the Psalm says they become sweet like honey, sweeter than honey, in fact, dripping from the honeycomb. He uses this food analogy. The ordinance of God are so desired. Now, one of two things are happening here. Either the psalmist is looking for God and his posterior and going, or what I think is actually happening is that he's recognizing that when we realize that God has our best interests at heart, it takes whatever we've been eating, whatever we've been feasting on in life, the things that have sustained us in life, the habits and routines, our daily food, and it makes them all the more sweeter. I don't think God is calling every single one of us to become monks or nuns, to throw out whatever life we're living. I think God is seeking to take your giftedness, your specialness, your uniqueness, whatever you've been doing, whatever you've been feasting on in life, that food, that foundation, and to make it a little sweeter in part because of what God dreams for you. To have you follow commands a little better, to have you have your eyes enlightened that you might see the poverty, injustice, and hurt throughout the world, and you step up in the name of justice and love and help others, that you would work on yourself, that you would understand the ways that God is speaking throughout the day, that you might learn through the night and integrate knowledge into your life, and to notice those moments when God runs past you in gleeful joy, and to slow down and give thanks. Finally, at the very end of Psalm 19, verse 14 says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you." If you've been around the life of the church, you've heard this benediction so many times. This is such a cool way to begin or end a prayer. If you ever feel insecure or awkward when you're praying or talking to God, first of all, God doesn't care, I don't believe. If you're spending time to talk to God, you use whatever language you want to use. But if you're looking for a prompt or a bookend, this might be something cool. God, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you. Whatever I say, whatever I'm feeling, I pray that it aligns with you. I'm submitting myself to your glory. I'm bowing down to honor you, that I might hear what you would speak throughout the day, learn from it through the night, notice the ways of joy that brush past me in the day, that I would understand that your law, your commands, your ordinances take my daily food and make it that much sweeter, so I could be that much better in your eyes for this creation that you've made. Peace and love, brothers and sisters.